hands up if you work as an environmentalist. Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, my goal here today is to increase those numbers. This is one of the world's most beloved environmentalists, Jane Goodall. And by living amongst chimpanzees, Jane completely transformed the way we think about our closest living animal relatives. I mean, she just looks like an environmentalist, doesn't she? She's outside in the rainforest. She's got no makeup on. She's wearing that canvas clothing in a neutral shade. Well, this is also an important environmentalist, but you might not recognize him as easily. This is Mark Carney. Mark's a Canadian banker who's currently the governor of the Bank of England. And 2 years ago, he led a call to investors around the world, asking them to pay more attention to the financial risks of climate change. What are bigger storms and floods and forest fires going to cost the companies they've invested in? And what companies should they be investing in to reduce those risks? This is critical work. If we're going to build low-carbon economies in the next decades, the financial sector is going to be a big engine of that build. Mark and Jane come from very different backgrounds, and that's the way it should be. The hard work of environmental progress needs people from all walks of life to speak up. People in governments have, of course, passed important environmental laws. Sometimes protesters have played an important role. But in 2019, we need to think about an even bigger tent, because we're creating even bigger problems. We're not just affecting our own backyards anymore. We're changing entire global systems, like climate, and the biodiversity that underpins everything we do. Just last month, scientists around the world put out a report telling us that 1 million species are at risk of extinction. 1 million. That's an unprecedented number in human history. I don't even know how to show you that number, which is why I just have this one sad sea turtle caught in a fishing net up on my slide. If I was to put every species at risk of extinction on a slide and run through those slides 1 per second, this TED Talk would last 11 days and 11 nights. And none of us want that to happen. We need to think differently about how we solve problems this big, and who is fundamentally disrupting how we think and work and relate to one another right now. People working in technology. We're putting artificial intelligence, blockchain, and smart devices to work, completely disrupting systems like transportation. Think about Uber and driverless cars and electric vehicles. We're putting technology to work disrupting delivery systems all around the world. Think about Amazon and how that has changed how you shop, and digital music, and e-readers. But are we disrupting environmental conservation in the same way? Like many of you, I've grown up surrounded by water. And it's those lake ecosystems that matter the most to me. They're a big part of my childhood. That's me sitting in the middle doing no work at all. It may have affected my choice of husband, who builds beautiful wood canvas canoes. And I'm raising my children on lakes now. And in Canada, we often feel like we're always going to be surrounded by healthy lakes, magically and forever. But that's just not true. The latest reports on watershed health across this country show us that the waters around us in this room are under severe stress. Sometimes you'll see these stressors, like the zebra mussels that are appearing on your lake. Sometimes you haven't really started noticing them yet. Climate change is reducing the amount of space that cold water fish have to hang around in. And that means that those cold water fish are getting smaller. But you may not have noticed that yet. Some of those stressors you're never going to notice, like the 400 million pieces of tiny plastic that flowed down the Assiniboine and the Red River into Lake Winnipeg just this past year. But just because you're not noticing these stressors doesn't mean they're not there. And if we want our kids to grow up with the same relationships to lakes that we've had, we're going to have to put some work into it. So let me tell you a story about where I work. At the International Institute for Sustainable Development, we run a freshwater research lab called the Experimental Lakes Area. It's a set of 58 small lakes just east of Kenora, where we run whole ecosystem research unique in the world. These lakes are our labs, and these are our test tubes. Scientists at the Experimental Lake are working on all kinds of ways to keep our water clean. But the issue that started it all 50 years ago, and that we're still working on today, are algal blooms. This is Lake Erie, and that green muck is algae. These algal blooms happen all over the world all the time. And of course, as you can imagine, they're terrible for the fish and organisms that live in lakes. They can also be toxic for humans. An algal bloom in 2014 on Lake Erie shut down the drinking water of 400,000 people. And it was in 1973, the year I was born, don't do the math, that research we did at the Experimental Lakes Area really showed the world what causes these blooms. We knew it was an excess of nutrients in the water, but we weren't able yet to pinpoint exactly which one. So on this now very famous lake that we affectionately call Lake 226, we dropped a curtain dividing the lake in half. And we put carbon and nitrogen in the top half of that lake, and carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus in the bottom half, and a bright green algal bloom appeared, showing people around the world that it's the presence of phosphorus in lakes that causes these algal blooms. So where does phosphorus come from? Well, it comes from the products that we flush through our sewer systems, and it comes from the fertilizer we put on our farms that sometimes runs off into our rivers and streams and lands up in our lakes. And this research did spawn some innovation in reducing phosphorus in the products that we use. Remember when your laundry detergent went phosphate-free? That helped. But all the advances that we've made have been reversed in recent years. Because the runoff from farm production has only increased, cities have gotten bigger, and now climate change is warming our lakes, making this problem worse. We've been relying on governments to solve this, and on environmental organizations or communities that live around these blooms. But no one, since 1973, has come up with a large-scale, cost-effective solution for stopping algal blooms. So, could technology help us think a little differently about how we approach this problem? Yes, it could. And some interesting developments are actually underway. And you tech-savvy, good-looking, innovative TED Talk people could help us do a lot more. Let's start by thinking about what's happening on farms right now. Tech companies are popping up to help a new generation of farmers use data to be much more efficient. Drones are now flying over some farms, surveying crops and alerting farmers to pest infestations. Farmers can now tell field by field what the soil quality is and whether it's going to rain tomorrow. And all of this information allows those farmers to apply fertilizer in precisely the right place, at precisely the right time, and precisely the right amount. This is great for the farmers. It saves them money. It's great for all of us. The crops are super productive. But for our conversation here today, it's also really important because it seriously decreases the excess phosphorus that runs off those farms into our waterways. And technology is also helping us be much more precise about measuring where and when that phosphorus enters our lakes, so we know where to focus our attention. IBM is partnering with researchers on Lake George in New York to build the most advanced environmental monitoring system ever made. There are sensors on platforms in the lake. There are 500 sensors all around the lake, recording as much data in 1 week as the poor researchers working on that lake have collected in the last 30 years. They're now able to see in real time what's going on in every corner of this lake. Of course, not every lake can afford the full sensor treatment, but all lakes do have sensors around them if we just think a little differently about what that looks like. Maybe you are the sensors. You've got cell phones, internet connections. Why are we sending a handful of researchers across the massive watershed that feeds into Lake Winnipeg to take water samples and see where phosphorus is entering our waterways. Why aren't we asking all the people who already live across the prairies beside streams and rivers to take water samples for us and become citizen scientists and help us figure out where this pollution is entering our water? This is already happening right here in our own backyard. Volunteers are working with the Lake Winnipeg Foundation to take water samples on the streams where they live. And the data they've collected so far is showing us that there are hot spots for phosphorus runoff in southern Manitoba, and that's where we should be focusing our efforts. Millions of people around the world are becoming citizen scientists by doing something as simple as taking a picture with their phones. You take a picture of the hummingbird you love seeing in the summer. Now this time I want you to upload that picture to a citizen scientist app like iNaturalist or eBird. And within seconds, that app will tell you what species you're looking at and send you all kinds of interesting information about how that hummingbird lives. It's like any time you go for a walk and you've got your phone with you, and you know you've got your phone with you, you've got a little army of scientists in your back pocket now. And even more importantly, that photo you uploaded to iNaturalist is an extra set of eyes for scientists around the world to use. And we need hundreds and thousands of extra sets of eyes right now to track major patterns of species, like how the ruby-throated hummingbird migration pattern is changing from year to year. We need to be able to see how these big problems that we're creating are affecting tiny birds like a hummingbird, so that we can get better at helping them with the space they need. Of course, conservation isn't just about fish and birds. It's about how we want to live our lives. And sometimes technology can show us the changes that are happening in the environmental world in ways that are new and interesting to us. Let's talk about frozen water for a minute. Maybe, like my husband, you build a skating rink in your backyard every year. That takes a lot of effort. You've got to shovel it off after every snowfall. You've got to smooth the ice with your very complicated homemade Zamboni system that runs through the kitchen window in the middle of winter. But all that effort is worth it, because that rink connects you to the kids and parties in your neighborhood that make winter here in Winnipeg so enjoyable. So if you have a rink in your backyard, sign up to Rink Watch. It's a website that asks people to record the skating conditions on their backyard rinks so that we can tell over time how climate change is affecting those rinks. And the data that's been collected by the 1,400 people who are helping with this initiative, it's already showing researchers that outdoor skating days will decrease by 34% in Toronto in the coming decades. That's an interesting way of thinking about how ice loss isn't just something that affects polar bears in the far north. It's something that affects how we live in our own communities across this country. Listen, technology is not going to solve every problem we've ever had, but it's not going away. And where your phones can help, let's put them to work. And maybe, just maybe, those phones will start connecting you to more than your friends and family. They'll start connecting you to the natural world. Let me be perfectly clear. I'm here to recruit you. If you work in tech, think about an environmental group in your city or your country you think is doing interesting work, and don't just give them money, although I'm not going to say don't. But talk to them about what they're doing and see if you can lend your expertise. You'd be surprised at what's going on. We're testing new technologies for how to clean up oil spills in fresh water. We're teaching machines to learn how to identify boat trailers on the highways so that we can see which lakes are getting the most boat traffic, and that's where we can put our zebra mussel cleaning stations. Yeah. And this fall, we'll be launching an aqua hacking competition where we're asking all of you to help us think about new ways of removing pollution from water. And even if you have no idea what a blockchain is, and you're never going to, I'm recruiting you too. Because at this moment in human history, you hold an incredible amount of technological power at your fingertips. Find a citizen science initiative that you think is cool and join it. This is my team, and they're doing great work. But they need you to help them disrupt environmental conservation and put everyone to work for nature. Hands up if you have a cell phone. That's it. Keep them up. Look around you. That's more like it. You're all environmentalists now. I look forward to working with you. Thank you.